Hey folks, I hope I'm audible now. Hey Mayank. So first of all, I'm really sorry about postponing the entire workshop, but I'm back with better internet now, and hopefully we'll have a smooth run this time around. So we'll just wait around and see if people join back, and then we'll continue with the workshop. Good evening. All right, let me just check if is my audio breaking? Let me know if you have any trouble hearing me or watching my video or my streams. Okay, is there an echo? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Or we'll just wait for 8 p.m. and then we'll start without trouble. Okay. Perfect. Just go into this mode. Just see. Let me just see if I can up the resolution a bit. All right. Okay, let's start with the workshop then. It's 8 p.m. And this will be recorded, so it's available on my YouTube channel later on. So you'll be able to come back and watch it again. But for now, let's begin with this workshop. I'm very happy that you guys have joined back, and I'm sorry about the delay. And I just hope that we'll have a very smooth run now, and you'll get to learn a lot of things about web applications from this workshop. After that, we'll also cover things on how you can participate yourself and build your own applications. So first of all, let's discuss the agenda for today. So what we'll be covering today is, first thing, we'll be identifying how a web app is built. So what is the front end and what is the backend? So you may have heard of front end and backend. So here we'll be looking at more concrete idea of what a front end is and what a backend is. What are different activity, what are different functions of these two parts of a web app, and how do you identify these things in the first place? That is the first thing that we'll look at. The second thing is understanding APIs. So once you're familiar with the idea of front end and backend, we'll see where APIs fit into this picture. You may have heard of APIs a lot, and we'll just have an intuitive understanding of what APIs are, how they are built, how you can use those APIs, and where does API fit in the entire architecture of web applications. All right, so that is the second thing we'll cover. After that, I'll give you a very short activity. We'll just browse any website. So you can take any website of your choice, you can go there, and we'll inspect. You may have heard of inspecting element of different websites. So we can go there, choose a website of your choice, inspect element, and we'll see different sources of where data is coming from, what is the different design elements there are in the entire website. So we'll cover that. It's a very short activity. We'll just spend some time there. After that, I'll tell you about a server architecture called Model View Controller. Right, so this is a very popular server architecture. We'll see what this is, what is model, what is view, what is controller, and why this is important, and why we are covering this in this context. Right, so we'll just see what MVC architecture is and what it usually helps you with. After that, coming back to APIs, we'll see how the APIs are built. Like, who builds these APIs? Can you build your own one? Do you have to use your own APIs, or can you use any external APIs or not? So we'll touch on that idea as well. Like, how do you accomplish very complex tasks using very simple applications with the help of APIs? All right. So once you understand the concept of a web app, and once you know what APIs are, then we'll see how this communication actually happens. So how do you use this API, right? So what is the actual process in which you make calls to different applications? So we'll just look at REST protocol. You may have heard of REST APIs. So again, we'll have a very intuitive understanding of what RESTful services are, what is REST API, and what it helps you accomplish. Right? And finally, after all of that is covered, we'll see how we can implement a very simple application that just accomplishes calls between a server and a client. And we can do that in any languages. It doesn't have to be any language specific or a framework specific thing. I saw a lot of comments there on YouTube where people were asking about what stack are we going to use. So it's really agnostic. So we don't have to worry about any stack. We just have to worry about what the entire process looks like. And then you can replicate the same functionality in any language of your choice. So you can choose a MERN stack, you can choose Node.js, you can use Python. So it all depends on what you're comfortable with the most, right? So it doesn't really require you to learn any particular framework here. All right, so once all of that is done, after this workshop is done, I'll show you a Crio project which is hosted on Crio Projects Hub. So that is the project which you're going to follow over this weekend to build an application. So that project will use all of the concepts that you're going to learn here. So everything that we're going to teach here will be used in some form in that project. Plus there'll be some challenge in the end. So you'll have to, just maybe improvise and research about topics and then figure out how to solve things. So that will be an extra challenge for you guys there. So you'll be completing that project and then we'll see where to submit that project later on. So let's just continue with this entire thing now. Let me just quickly check if there's any questions so far. Yeah, I think it's going good right now. So let's just proceed with this thing. I'll keep checking the comments after every section so that I know what questions there are and I'll be able to answer all of them together, since we don't have any interaction in the form. Okay, so at the high level overview of an app. So first thing that we're going to notice is that an application has two parts, a front end and a back end. So usually the application somewhat looks like this, right? So you have in some ways, say any client application. This is a desktop application and this is the mobile application. So you have these two as your clients and they're trying to access some information from a server, right? And this server in itself fetches data from the database, correct? So now this clearly has two different parts here. So this part, which is inside the red box, acts as a backend. And the part on the left, which is your devices, your clients, those is mostly deal with the front end, because this is the part that you see and interact with. So on your phone, if you click on a button, if you click on, say, some kind of lists and stuff, those are the parts that you interact with directly and yet parts that you see, right? And those have data which is coming from some server, which is hosted on some platform, right? So that server, that entire part which gives you the data is the backend. And the part which displays the entire thing is the front end, right? So this is a very basic idea, very basic demarcation between a front end and a back end. So you can think of it in this way: whatever data is generated, whatever data is being sourced, that comes from the back end. And how you display that as a view is part of the front end, right? So that front end handles just the buttons and all the different UI elements, and all the data is handled by the back end. So this is a very clear difference between a front end and a back end. So you may have heard of, you may have seen multiple examples of front end. So this is one example which I took from Android. So this is the new Android interface. So all of this is part of the front end. So you see there are like pie charts, there are different buttons, there are, say, notification panels. All of this are part of the front end. Now, where is this data coming from? That will be the part of the backend. Backend will handle how it is sourcing all of the data. So the front end doesn't need to know how the backend is sourcing all the information. It just gets some information which is had to display in its own form. So you may choose to display it in terms of circles or any other UI elements, right? And this is an example of front end. Another example is the Zomato app. Again, this all of that which you see on your screen right now is part of the front end. So this is entirely on you to design how the buttons will look like, what will be the gestures, what are the animations you're going to use. So all of that comprises the front end, right? So it doesn't have to deal with any data management or any kind of business logic implementation. So you don't have to worry about what restaurants are open at this particular time. So all of that logic will reside in the server side. So all the front end needs to deal with is just displaying the received information in a very intuitive way. That in itself is a very important challenge, because you have to worry about how to best showcase your data. Is it following the best UI principles? Is it really user friendly? All of that comes under the perspective of a front end part, right? And when you come to backend, it's just a simple application of your choice. So don't think of backend as a black box that you don't understand how it is built. It is just a very simple application which is running on some kind of machine hosted on a remote server. We'll be looking at the backend when we go to the future steps. But just to give you an understanding, it's just a very simple, say, Python application or say Node.js application, which is running on some machine which you host at a publicly accessible URL. So that is all what the backend is. So backend has some kind of database linked to it, and all this application does is source information from the database, maybe apply some business logic on top of it, and then send this information to the front end. Right? So that essentially is what backend is. So you can think of it as a set of functions that you have defined, and each one of which will service some business need. For example, you can define a function, say, get list of restaurants or get restaurant timings. So all of these functions are part of an application that you build and host somewhere. And then your front end is going to make requests to this backend at those particular functions, will send the information back to the front end. So this is how the entire flow happens, right? So this is the separation of concerns here. So this is not concerned with whatever like processes the backend is going through, right? That is the idea behind a backend and a front end. I hope it was clear so far. Let me just check for data transfer. Do we use only REST API? Is there any other API for data sharing? Yeah, we'll cover that in the future section when we cover REST API. Right, so that is something which is coming ahead. You keep the logic in the front end or the back end. So it depends on what your application is. So for example, let's say you have some kind of logic you have to apply on the database. Right? So database is not accessible directly to the front end, right? So your backend application has access to database, and any kind of sorting. For example, if you want to limit your results only to say if you want to check what restaurants are open right now. So you only send those restaurants over the network which are open currently. So all of that logic is applied at the backend, because you don't want to send the entire list of restaurants over the network and then the front end will sort out what restaurants are open. That would be not a very efficient choice. So you can keep the logic at both ends. It's not a very hard and fast rule that you have to keep all of your logic at backend or keep all your logic at front end. It depends on what your application is and what is the best optimized way of doing it, right? Or I was built based on what technologies. So the technology, as I told you, is not dependent on any technology. You can choose any technology you want. So I will just be covering the concepts here. I'll just be showing you how to make REST calls, how do you communicate between different services, what an API is. But to implement this, you can choose in any languages. The example which I have built is in Node.js and Python. So we are going to cover these two languages while we are checking out the application. But later on, you can also choose any different language of your choice. You can choose Go, you can choose Dart, and any other front end, back end of your choice. What is Xamarin Tech? Xamarin Tech is not in the scope of a discussion here, but Xamarin is a cross-platform language which you can use to develop applications. So you can check that out, but that is not a part of the scope. You can also use Xamarin to build web applications, of course. Okay, so this is out of topic here. So let's just get back to stream and we'll continue. So yeah, so high level overview, I think it's clear. The front end and the back end part, very basic definition here. Now we'll jump into APIs, right? So far, what we have covered is front end and back end. So we have just reversed that image here. So on the right, you now see what is called the front end. You have your mobile devices, you have your IoT devices, you have other applications. So all of this will form a part of the front end, right? So just a sec. Sorry about that. Yeah. So this is this part here. This part is the front end. All right. So this is the front end. Now this part is the back end, as I already told you. And where does API fit in this entire picture? API acts as an interface between your front end and your back end, right? So for example, as I told you, front end needs to get information from the back end, right? That is how the system works. But how is that process going to take place? So what is a contract? How does the front end know what are different functions that are exposed? You remember in the last discussion that we had, I told you backend is just, say for example, a combination of different functions there. So say get list of restaurants or get restaurant timing. So all of those are different functions here. But how does the front end know that okay, these are the functions that are available to me? How am I going to use all of these functions there? So all of that is exposed through APIs. So as you can see in this infographic from Red Hat here, APIs sit between a backend and a front end. It facilitates all communication between backend and a front end. So that is the basic idea of what APIs are. Now let us focus on more concrete definitions of what API is. So first of all, now you can think of API as kind of a contract, right? So let me just write a few things here. Let's just say I have a backend, right? This is my backend application, and as I mentioned, it has some kind of functions here. You can say I define a function which says say get user. This is one function, let's say, right? Another function is say get value, any value out of sort, right? Now, say I have a front-end application. So this is my mobile app, and it has to display this two information. It has to display information about the user and about some value. Now, how does my front-end application know what are the different functions defined in the backend? I can't let the front-end know entirely the structure of my application, right? So what I do is I give this front-end a contract. So I just tell him that, okay, I have two different functions, function get user and function get value. How are these implemented, where these are written, where these are hosted, all of that information is not put in the front end. I just give a contract to the front end that, okay, if you want to get the user, you have to call such and such a function. So there will be some URL at which this backend is hosted. And what you will do is you just have to call, say, get user, and then you'll get the information that you require. So basically, what the API does is it kind of abstracts all of the information from the backend to the front end, right? So let's just look at this definition here. APIs let your product or service communicate with the other products, right? So if you have multiple services, so you have a front end and a backend. So how does the two communicate? Using APIs. So API is application programming interface. So it is an interface that is helped to program your applications. That is what API is, right? So it is like a contract or interface that is handed to any service that wants to use your backend application, right? So it doesn't have to be a front-end service. Say, for example, if you have one backend here, so you've written some backend application, say B1 here, and there's another backend application, say B2. So both of these are at the backend, right? So you can have multiple services at the backend, you can imagine. So it doesn't have to be a front-end and a backend. Any two services, if this service wants to use some functions from this particular service, right? So if I have function 1 here, function 2 here, and say function 3 and function 4. Now let's just say a function 3 needs some information from function 1, right? So how does function 3 get the information from function 1? It uses some kind of a contract, right? It just knows that, okay, function, so that it just knows the backend one has some function name function 1 and can call that function using some kind of protocol, which we'll discuss later on, the REST API, right? So that is what it is. It's just a way of allowing different services to communicate with each other easily, right? So that is what API is. So it's like a contract that is handed over to any kind of service, and you can use that to communicate with your backend application. Now, why are you following this model, right? Why are we giving a contract to the other service? This is important because let's just say for now the function F1 was implemented. Say I wrote, say, print hello world as a definition of this function 1, correct? Now let's just say in the future I want to modify this function. I want to instead do, say, print hello Crio. Let's just say I want to modify the implementation of this function, right? Now if this function F3 wants to still call F1, so what happens here is the function F3 doesn't know how the implementation of function 1 is, right? What is implementing here? What is the inside code of it? Function 3 has no idea of that. All it has is a contract which says that function F1 will return some kind of a string to it. All F3 knows is F1 will return some kind of string to it, right? So that is why the contract is important. So when you give a contract to somebody, the person doesn't have to know all the intricate details of how that function is implemented. All it needs to know is that F1 will give me some kind of string which I will display in some form, correct? And that F1 implementation can change in the future or can change with time depending on what your business uses is. But that all the calling functions don't have to have any knowledge of any of that changes, right? That is why the contract is important. Now API is basically this. And as I told you that, say, user interface is defined for humans to interact with. In the same way, API is something that other computer applications interact with. So you can think of it as an UI for a software application, right? So one software wants to use some another software, and they will use an API to communicate this thing to each other. That is the basic idea behind it. Now, for some intuitive understanding of what API is, let's just look at a very, very common example here, which is the case of a restaurant and a waiter. All right. So let's just imagine a scenario here. So you are sitting at a restaurant, and see, this is your table here, right? So you're sitting here. Now you're presented with some kind of a menu, correct? You're presented with some kind of menu that says, say, you have paneer available, you have, say, naan, chicken, whatever different items there are. You get a menu for whatever applications there are. And there's a waiter here, correct? There's a waiter who gives you this menu, correct? Now what you do is you see, okay, I have these things available and I want, say, paneer and naan. So what I do is I just select these two things. I tell the waiter that, okay, give me paneer and naan. And what the waiter will do is it'll take your request, it will go to the restaurant kitchen, whatever kitchen there is. There, whatever processes happen, the client doesn't know anything about it. I won't know how the paneer is being made or how the naan is being made, right? So what this waiter does is it just takes this request, first of all, presents a menu of whatever is available, right? What are the different functions you can use? Then when you select a particular function, it takes that request to the backend, right? It takes the request to your kitchen, which is the backend here. The kitchen will perform whatever applications it wants, whatever logic it wants to apply in any form. Maybe in the future it can change the recipe, but I won't know anything about that, right? So what I do is I just sit here, I just wait for my request to come back. So this backend will do some kind of processing here. It will just prepare all kinds of food and stuff. And after all that is done, it will send the request back to me through the waiter. Correct? So this is some kind of an interface between me and the kitchen. Correct? So you can think of me as a front end here and my kitchen as a backend. So basically this acts as an interface between that. And this menu is the contract from which I know what are the options I have available, right? So I know I can have menu as paneer, I can have naan. All of this is known to me because I have this contract in my hand, right? I won't go into the kitchen to personally examine what are different dishes that are being made. I'll have to, it's much easier to have a contract in this space, right? So this is the basic idea of what APIs help with, right? So these are two different services, and API is helping as an interface to communicate between these two services. That is the basic understanding of what API is. Let me go back to the YouTube chat and see if we have some questions here. Okay, so yeah, there will be recorded session. Don't worry about that. It will be all on the channel here. And let me up. So is this for a monolithic or microservices? So currently we're only discussing monolithic applications, so it's not very advanced form. You can find microservices on my channel there. I have a playlist there, but we're not covering microservices in this section here. We're just plain and simple monolith applications only, right? Are we going to code today? No, we're not going to code today. I'll just show you the code of how these applications work. You'll be coding yourself. You'll be researching. You'll be following a module from Crio projects, and that is how you're going to complete your project, right? So we won't be live coding here. All right. So after that, we'll see any relevant questions here. What is the difference of web app and web page? So web page in itself is kind of front end, right? So when you look at a web page, it's a thing which you interact with. That's part of the front end. And web app is something which sits at the back. So that's a basic difference between a web app and a web page. Why are you using two backends? I'm not sure if I get this question. I'm not using two backends. Let's just see if we can use two backends as well. I think you're referring to this question here. So what this scenario is, let's just get back to the restaurant here, right? So taking this example, say I am the client, I wanted paneer, correct? And I send this request to my backend, which is this kitchen. Now let's just say this kitchen needs, say, paneer, the actual product paneer. So what it'll do is it will contact some kind of grocery, right? It will contact some kind of some other service which will send paneer to it. So the kitchen will just use the paneer and maybe mix some gravy and other stuff with it. So the kitchen is not concerned itself with where the paneer is coming from. It's coming from some dairy or sorts, right? So what happens is, when you make a request to some backend, it is not guaranteed that, okay, this backend itself will be able to serve your request. It may need to communicate with some other kind of service as well, right? So it can communicate with, say, paneer service, say a delivery service if you're staying somewhere else, right? So this backend in itself will also communicate with other services so that it can service a request in the best way possible, right? So that is not a very hard and fast rule that you need to have only one backend. So any number of services that are at the backend which are functioning together will need to communicate with each other, right? So if you have two different applications which are performing different kinds of services, so these need to communicate with each other, right? So that is what I meant by, say, communication between different services. I hope that is clear. Okay, this is a series. Yeah, it is a series that will be continuing every 2 weeks. We'll be covering different concepts here. So this is a web app in this scenario. We'll be covering, say, Flutter or maybe other things in the future workshops. Okay, can I start working on Saturday and Sunday? Yeah, of course, this is the plan. So we'll be demonstrating this entire idea tonight, and after that you'll have this whole night tomorrow and day after tomorrow to build your own projects by following a module on Crio projects, and then we'll see the best projects, what those are, and we'll be rewarding those projects as well. So that is the idea behind it. So you'll have a weekend to code the entire thing. Is it better to continue development using Python frameworks? Yeah, whatever works best for you. So there is nothing wrong about any kind of framework. So if you know Python really well, if you are understanding Python really good, so I think you should go and create Python frameworks. There is no any such way of ranking different languages or frameworks, right? It just whatever suits you best and whatever suits your application the best should be your choice in that case. After completing fellowship, yeah, this is not something I can answer. How can one identify best UI UX for the app? So best UI UX for the app is some kind of front-end question. So for that, you have to do some research on what are there are multiple courses available. So you may see that what is the best choices you can make for buttons. For example, if you want to make something which is really accessible to the public, you can have bigger buttons. Or say, if you want people to answer questions well, you can have, say, kind of sliders instead of text fields, because people don't want to type into some fields. They just want to slide and answer questions. So all of these things are just very minute details that you can find on courses online, on websites online. So this is something which is not part of the discussion here. Is Django worth learning in today's time? Yeah, Django is definitely worth learning. Do you always draw the architecture system before coding? Definitely, definitely. Because drawing it helps you visualize what you're building, right? So for example, if you look at the kitchen example, so this helped me better visualize why two backends are required, right? So this is the client, this is the backend, this is some kind of thing. So when you draw an architecture, you know what exactly you're going to build, right? So this is the idea which you get when you're building something out of this. So drawing architecture is always the primary choice which I do. Because if you don't draw an architecture, you're not really sure what you're building, right? You don't have an idea, you don't have a very perfect example of what these things are. All right, so when the application is being built, what kind of tests confirmations are needed before a basic implementation is live? What assumptions are to be kept in minimum while implementing? So if you're building an application, so mostly all you have to have some tests which validate all of your functions. So example, if I have a function which says get list of customers, right? So I'll write a unit test that can see if the list of customers is actually returning a list or not. Right? That is one thing which I can do. So first thing which you check is whether all your functions are working fine or not. After that, second thing which you check is if you're using the right port or not, right? So that's also one of the things which people miss. If you're exposing at the right port, if you're accessing at the right port. So all of these things are very, very basic ideas behind testing. You can check out test-driven development, which is TDD, and what that is, and you'll be able to, build better, test-driven development models. Okay. What if someone doesn't know about coding? So if you don't know about coding, it's all right. You can just learn the concepts here. You can know what backend is, what frontend is, what APIs are, what REST is. So once you're comfortable with all of that, I'll show you the code. It's really simple. You don't have to know coding beforehand to understand the code. It's very simple. And you can then take on any language you want and then continue coding with that. All right. So yeah, I think we're done with for now. Let's just go back. Otherwise, we'll be behind. Okay. So now, just to recap, we have covered a high-level overview of what the simple application is. So you know what a front-end is, what a back-end is. You also know what APIs are. So you have an understanding that APIs are in some way an interface between a back-end and a front-end. It gives you a contract. So for example, if you're building a back-end application, you build an API. So it's just a kind of contract that you can hand over to any different services which are willing to use your application, right? So giving a contract will let the other service know what applications you're exposing, what are the functions that you're exposing to that different services. So this is what API is, right? You can ignore the API management system here because it's not in the scope of this discussion, but API management system is used when you have multiple APIs. So if you're building multiple backends, you have a lot of APIs and you just want all of those to be exposed through a single endpoint. That is when you use an API management system. So we're not going to cover that here. It's not really important. What is important is you understand what APIs are essentially. All right. So I hope this intuitive understanding is somewhat clear to you. Now let's just go and do some activity now. So far we have discussed front and back end. Now what you're going to do is you're going to go to a website, any website of your choice. I'll be doing that on my own in this screen as well. So you're going to choose any website of your choice. We're going to inspect element. So we'll see what are different parts of a website, how it is built, like what is the front end. We'll be able to identify what are different elements there, what are the buttons and stuff like that, and how you can modify those values. After that, we're going to see what are the sources, right? Where is the information? Where is the code for all of that? So let's just go to my browser now and say I'll go to say some example. Maybe I like Surface Studios a lot, so why not Surface Studio? And so I'll just open any website of my choice. So you can also do it on your own. You can just choose any website, and when you right click and click on inspect, right? That is when you'll see this entire console comes up. Correct? Now let me just cross this up. Now there's a lot of things on your screen right now. Right? So you don't have to be confused by all of that. So first of all, let's just click on this tab here. This will help me select any particular element and then highlight whatever code is relevant to that element. So let me just click on this button here. Now, let's just say I click on the surface icon here. Right? It highlights the surface written here. When I click on this, I'll get the corresponding HTML code for it. Right? So this is the corresponding HTML code. It says it's a button type. Now, all of the relevant information is here. Now, if you look at this styles section here, you'll see the color, border, all of that is mentioned here. So for example, let's just say I click on this thing again and I click on this bar here, right? Now I can see the background color is FFF, right? So it's entirely white. Now if I want to modify this color, I can maybe say I put it 5 here. So you can see it transform to yellow, right? So this is the front end part which is visible to me. I'm not modifying any part of the backend here because the backend here rests with the Microsoft servers, right? So I can't modify the servers right away. What I can do is I can modify the front end part here using this inspect element. So you can look at any of these elements. You can click on different parts. You can even change the name of Surface to your own name here. You can change the name of Microsoft. You can change the image which is here. So all of that is part of the front end which you can see. So I'll encourage you to check this out on your own later. So you can see whatever the different HTML code is. If you're interested in HTML, you can, try to change some values here. You can see how it reflects here. So all of that is part of what renders, what is the view that you can see. That is the UI part of it, right? Now let's just click on sources here. So in the sources, you see what is the JavaScript files for all of these things. So this is where your application code is running. So for example, there's another way to view sources, which is Control U. So in any website, if you click on Control U, that will load the entire source code for this entire website. So you can see this is the HTML code for the entire website. This is something you can check out on your own. It's not really relevant in our case, but I just wanted to let you know about these things so that you can check it out later on whenever you are free and you want to spend some time inspecting different parts of servers. All right, so this is the front end which I covered right now. So you can check out different parts, how those things are designed, what are different elements which are they using. For example, what is this thing? What is a button? How are the buttons designed? All of that is available really here. Right now, let's just look at what are the network calls that this website is making when it loads. Correct. So whenever a website is loading, it has to get all of this data from somewhere. Correct. And that somewhere we know is the backend. It must be calling some APIs, and those APIs are responsible for sending the data to this front end. Correct. So if you think of this image, if you think of any of the buttons here, all of that have some data which is coming in from some backend, right? So this image is coming from the Microsoft servers, right? Because this is not entirely on the front end. This is coming from Microsoft server. This price details, whatever price is mentioned here, this price is coming from the backend of Microsoft. So all of that has to all it has to load from somewhere, right? So how do you identify all of those things? It is from the network tab. So if you look at the below section here, let me just open the network. Where is it? Yeah, there's the network part. Correct. Now what I'll do is I'll just reload this entire website, and then we'll see what are different requests which are coming. I'll just expand this here so that you have a better idea. Now let's click on refresh here. Right, so you can see all these requests coming in for all different parts, right? So we'll click on any one of these things. So yeah, there's a prompt as well, correct? So let me just click on this one. So it says geo selector. Now when you click on any of this request, you'll have a lot of information here, correct? So if you look here, I've clicked on the headers part, and this is the request URL. Now this is the URL which is the API for it, right? So this is the part which tells you that okay, when you click on any of this button, this is the URL which is going to be modified, right? This is the URL which is this application calls in order to modify your location. So this prompt allows you to select what region you are currently in. So if you're in India, you can just click on India English. So this is the request URL, and you can see there's something called a request method, right? We haven't covered this yet. We'll be covering it next. So I'm just giving a very brief idea to make you curious about what these different things are and why these are important. So you see a kind of request URL, which is some kind of a Microsoft URL, right? So you can look at say Microsoft.com/amp/geoselector API, right? So this is the geoselector API, which is responsible for selecting and changing the location of your particular website, right? So this is the URL which this backend, this front end is calling, right? So you don't see this URL anywhere here, correct? So this is not visible to you directly. This is abstracted to you in the form of UI elements. All you see are UI buttons here. When you click on this button, there needs to be some call which is made to the backend, right? And this is the backend. This backend is hosted at this particular website here. And this is the API which it exposes, right? So this is the API, and this is the request method, which is get. I'll talk about more what different request methods are. Status code is 200 because it's a successful request. If you are familiar with HTTP status codes, 200 means a successful request, right? That is what it is. We can also research about what different status codes there are. So there are 400, which means server error, and there are multiple other status code which you can check out later. Right? And remote address. This is the address where the backend is hosted. So you can see this is the IP address and this is the port number. So this is where the request is getting to, right? So whenever you click on this thing, whatever requests are being made is hosted at this particular address. So it's really a lot of information here. You can click on payload and see what the payload is. So if current region is US, that is the payload which is being sent. Payload is just data that you send to your backend. Correct? That is the data which is sent through any kind of request. So in the headers part, all you see is what is the request URL, what is the request method that you're sending. In the payload section is the actual data which is sending to the server. So for example, if I want to click on India English, in that case, that information will be part of the payload which gets to the backend. Correct? So whenever you look at any request, there are two parts, headers and payload. There are multiple parts as well. But if you focus on headers and payload, headers will contain of all the different URL, whatever request you're making, and payload will contain the actual data which you can try to send or receive from the different backend servers. Alright, this is the idea behind it. I encourage you to explore any website of your choice. Look at the network part, look at what request it is making, look at any of the requests here. You can click on different tabs. You can see what is the payload for all different things. So you will see whatever information you're inputting into the browser is actually being sent as payload to the backend server, right? So you can look at that. You can look at the headers. You can see what different URLs the thing is calling, right? That is the idea behind it. So I think it's really interesting here, and you have this will be very fun activity to explore on your own. So I just hope that this is something which you can try on your own. Let's just see if I have any questions again. Can you speak in Hindi? Yes, if there's anything which is not able to understand, I'll also change my languages, no issues. All right, let me see if there's, how can I integrate APIs rather than authentication APIs in the project? Okay, so APIs doesn't have to be any kind of specific thing, right? So you can think of it as in a very fluid way. If you have an API, you can have an API for any service. So if you want authentication, if you want, say, connection to Telegram, if you want connection to Discord, so any communication between two different services always happens through an API, right? For example, if I am developing some application, right, and I want to send, and I want this application to send an email, or if I want this application to send a message in Telegram channel, so all of that communication, all of this linking is going to happen through some API. So the only way my application can send a message on Slack or send a message on, say, WhatsApp or Telegram is when Telegram will give me an API. Okay, Telegram will tell me, okay, this is the API, this is the contract that you have in your hand, and now these are the methods which you can use to deliver your functions. So you can imagine that Telegram will have an API which says send message. Now what my application is going to do is it is going to call that particular message, that particular function here, and in the payload I'll be supplying what message I want to send, right? So I'm not going to directly modify Telegram channels on my own. My application doesn't have access to Telegram's server, right? I can't directly go there and change the chats of some random person. What I can do is I can make request to the Telegram server through the Telegram API. Right? So Telegram API is a contract. I know that, okay, I can use this particular function, say send message function, and I can send whatever message I want to send to the server using in the payload section of my request. I'll put in the whatever URL the server is hosted at, and then send the request there. So any communication between different services is going to take place through an API. So don't worry about authentication stuff. Whatever is there, that will always be available through APIs, right? So this is something which is behind it. I don't have any knowledge of programming language, so can I follow this? Of course, you can follow this session. You don't have to have any programming language knowledge. If you understand the concepts well here, you'll be able to apply this in any language of your choice later on. All right, an important element. Okay, sure thing. Okay. Do making React projects help in getting good jobs? Of course, it does. A lot of React internships available. Jay, okay, what is this? So can you speak in Hindi? Okay, please don't. Okay. I learned so much about development. Okay, sure thing. Bye. Let's see if there's another question. Payload means, okay, so payload is just a term which means the data which you're going to send through a network, right? So we'll be covering the network calls just in the next section. But for now, I'll just tell you that if you have two different services, you're making network call between the services, say get request or whatever request, the data which you send is called the payload, right? So it's not an entirely new concept, just the renaming of data to payload. That's the very basic understanding of what a payload is, right? So this is something which you send as part of your request to whatever backend you're sending it to. All right. I don't see any network tab at 3 dots in my laptop. Okay, so if you don't see a network tab, you have to add this network tab. So if you look at inspect here again, so there's a plus sign here, right? So if you don't see network tab, you can just click on the plus. You'll see some kind of network here. Right? So this is how you get the network tab. And if you're using some different browser than Edge or Chrome, I'll encourage you to just search for where to get this network tab on your particular browser. All right. Okay. Do you please get us? Okay. What is this? What is the best coding language if one is targeting social media for both Android and iOS users? Okay, this is a question which is not really relevant in this case, but I'll just still answer. You can use Flutter, or you can use React. This allows you to develop cross-native applications. You can also use Xamarin if you're familiar with that. That helps. Now can we get our own APIs? It works on our own commands. What really want to do? Yeah, so we'll be building our own API in the final application, which I tell you, which I show you. There will be an API which we have constructed on our own. So you define your functions. Okay, what are the functions which you are going to expose to the outside world? And then we'll also build a client which will access these functions on somebody's behalf. Right? So at the end, I'll be showing you this entire demo. I'll be showing you the server which exposes some functions and a client which is going to use these functions, right? So we'll be looking at that. Don't worry about that. Okay. I'm learning Java in project. Okay, what do you search for 5-year non-tech guy after completing fellowship program? Okay, we'll come back to all of these questions later on. Like the general questions we'll cover later. I'll just want you to cover any section specific questions in this part. Okay, is it better to learn What's the best way to hide API keys? Okay, these are some things which we can talk about later, not now. About login to work for tomorrow, this is something which is not clear. Okay, so we're done for now, all the questions. Let's just get back to the explanation part. So I hope this activity was clear. And in this time when I answered the question, I hope a lot of you went ahead and checked your own websites and tried to inspect element and see different networks and stuff. So this really helps you understand what the front end is, what are different elements which form a part of the UI, and also understand what the sources are, what is the backend, what are different URLs which your UI is calling in order to get the information or send information to the backend. Right? So we saw all of that through this activity here. So you have now a very clear understanding of what backend is, what frontend is, what an API is sort of a contract, and you also looked at this in real life using the inspect element function. All right, so far we are clear on all of that. Now let's look at server architectures, right? So far when you look at backend, all you know is some kind of an application, right? So you don't know exactly how it is built. All you know is some kind of an application which is running on some server or some host, and then it's exposing some kind of functions to you, right? Now in this section, we'll be looking at what that server might look like, correct? So if you have a backend, now what is this backend actually built of? It's not really relevant as per se. We can build it in any form you want, but I would just want to introduce you to MVC, which is really popular. And if you understand what MVC architecture is, it'll be really helpful in building servers in the future, right? So it's not really crucial here, but very good to know knowledge here. Okay. So yeah, we've introduced the idea of implementing an API using different functions, each of which expose some functionality, right? So we have introduced that idea. We haven't looked at the thing yet, but we just know that, okay, API is some kind of a set of different functions, and I expose these functions to some kind of an outside world, and all of those different applications can use my function. Now, how does it fit into the architecture of a server? Now, how do you actually implement a backend, right? So what actually goes over different services or different parts of a backend which actually going on, right? So let's just look at a very common server architecture, which is called the MVC architecture, right? So it's called a model view control architecture. So first of all, we'll look at this diagram later on. I'll just tell you each of what these components mean first of all. So let's look at model first, correct? So what is model? So model is any kind of data that you interact with. Let's just take an example. Okay, let me think of, say, again, the restaurant service. Let's just say you have a restaurant backend. Okay, now in this case, what is your data? Your data is the order, right? So what is the order which you're serving, right? That is the data which you're going to transfer between different parts. For example, if I have a front end here, let's say if this is the front end, correct? And this is my back end here. This is my back end. Now, what is the data which is being transferred between these two parts, right? So you can think of, say, order as one of the data. You can think of, say, customer information as one of the data. So all of these data options are represented as model. So model in itself is some kind of a class. You can think of it, say, if I define, say, class order, right? So class order, and define some attributes, say integer, order ID, or say different attributes. You can just choose string, name of the dish, whatever that is. So all of that, so you can think of this class in itself as some kind of model. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm defining different parts of my data. So my data doesn't have to be a part of a class. It can be a part of a table, right? So you can imagine I have an orders table here, and each row is one order, correct? So let's just say I have this row number 1, and all of this information is part of this table here. So for example, one column can be the ID, one column can be the name, another column can be something else. So this particular row here is one particular order, correct? And now I am choosing to represent this table in my code as a class, correct? So this is very easy to do, right? So you have different attributes. All you do is you just create a class and name all these things here. So now this is part of your model, right? So model is the data which is being transferred between your backend and your front end. So all this is a really abstract concept. So you don't have to know that there's something which is separate, which is called model, right? So this class is part of a model, right? So you don't have to think of it in this way. And model is some entity. It's not an entity in itself. It just represents the data that is being transferred. All right. So class order is a kind of a model. Class, say, customer will also be one kind of model, right? So all of this is part of what you call the model. Correct? So there's no such entity as model. It just represents the entire data part. All right. Now coming back to this thing. So as I said, it is a part of an app data or app services, and it is an interface for queries. Now, what does interface for query mean? Okay. So as I told you, I defined a class which is called order, and it represents the order data which is being sent here and there. Correct? So whatever data I'll be sending as part of this class. I'll be taking this class, I'll be serializing it, I'll be doing some operations on it, sending it to different services. All right. Now, how is this definition of class helping me? Why am I defining it as a class order, right? I can just easily send this row and just maybe find some way of sending it, or maybe I'll just send a string. Maybe what I can just say is I will send a string which is, say, the first element is the ID, then say I'll put an underscore here, I'll send the name, say paneer, and whatever thing. I can even send a string. Why do I make an entire class out of it? Right? What is the use of making a class out of it? Now, why we're making classes? Because of this function. Let's say I have this backend which I have defined as, say, I'll define one function which says get order, right? So this function is part of my backend, which I'm going to expose, right? So this is the contract which I'll be giving to my front end, correct? So not this entire function. I'll just tell my front end that, okay, I have one function which says get order, and it will, what is this get order going to return, right? Whenever this function is called, the front end needs to know what the output will be, right? So in this case, easily I can say that order is the type which is going to be returned, correct? Because I have already defined order here. So before making the call, my application knows, okay, whenever I call this get order function, I will get some quantity, some object of order. I'll get this type back. So it acts as an interface for different queries, right? So if you're doing a get query, you know that, okay, I'll receive an order part. And now how this is useful is the front end can then make use of this object. So for example, in the front end, you can imagine I made a call. Say this is my front end. This is my front end code, correct? What I did, I made a call here. So let's just say backend dot get order, right? So I just made this call here. Now my front end knows for sure that, okay, this is an order object, order o equal to 0. Now I can use o dot say name here or o dot id. So all of this functionality is now available because the type is known here, correct? So this defining it as a model is allowing me to have an interface for different queries. So either get order or maybe send order. If I want to post an order through a client, right? So if I look at this is say my client code, and I want to post an order to the server. So this is my kitchen, this is the backend. I want to send an order to it. So in what format do I send this order? Right? So I don't send a string directly. I send an order object. I create an order object, say order o equal to new order. I'm writing this in Java, but this is very similar syntax for all different classes. So say I create a new order and I define the order types as, say, order name equal to I want paneer and whatever quantity I want. So all of that information I'll define in the order, and I'll call, say, send order function or whatever order, and I'll pass this object to it, right? So it allows us as an interface of communication between different backends, correct? So that is why all of this is part of the model. So when you were defining any kind of data that is being sent, you define it as a model. And so you can see there is no specific mention of model anywhere here. As I told you, this is a very abstract concept. It just represents all of these things, right? So it represents the model, represents the customer, right? So this is the model here. The next thing we should think of is the controller. Or maybe we'll talk about the view first. Okay. So view, as you may imagine, is simply whatever you're viewing on your screen. So for example, if you have your mobile application here, so whatever is available to view on your screen is the view, right? So the only purpose of view is to render the data which is coming from the backend. So you can think of the model. I can look at it again. So this is the model. This is the order class. So maybe when I receive this order part, I receive this entire class object, right? I deserialize it here. I receive the order object. Now, how do I display this order object? Maybe I have to display the name here and the ID below, or say ID above, name below. So all of that part, the rendering of the information, that is handled by the view. So view takes your information and then displays in some very easy to watch format. All right, that is the idea of a view. Now, what is controller? Controller is really important. Now, controller, what it does is acts as an interface between model and view. So let's just say, and we find some space here. Yeah. So this is my view. Let's imagine this is my view. Okay, this is the view part. And see, this is a mobile application. All right. So you have different tabs here or whatever lists and stuff like that. And this is my backend. Okay, this is my backend. Let me just write it here, backend. And my model is, say, order. I'm sending details of my order to the front end. Correct? Now, how do I facilitate this communication? So there will be a controller here. There will be another file here, which is the controller. What this controller will do is this. It will take requests from the view. For example, say this particular section, let's just call it some window. This window wants to display information about the order. Correct? So what this view will do is it will send a request to my controller. All right. Now this controller in itself will know that, okay, since this request is for order, I'm going to forward this request to the order service here. Correct. So I'm going to call, say, the order function here. So I had the get order function defined, right? So what I'll do is this controller will just map whatever request comes in to whatever function you have defined. And we'll be looking at that idea later on when we look at the code. So just for your understanding, the controller, all it does is it takes some HTTP request which is coming in from your clients, and then it maps the request to some function. So you have a list of functions here, say get order, as I told you, get order, say get customer. So you have multiple functions defined in your backend, right? So you have multiple functions defined here. What this controller is going to do is it's just going to map all of these requests which are coming into the controller and map it to different functions. So it's just single point of entry. It's a single point of entry for your application. It will take all different requests from the client, and depending on what path they are following, it's going to forward this to different functions. So that we'll see what the path means, how this forwarding takes place. I just wanted to understand the entire architecture of this thing. You don't have to worry about details of how this path connection is doing, how the routing is happening. All of that will be covered later on. I just want you to understand that this is a very common architecture. And if somebody asks you what MVC is, you should be able to understand, okay, this is something which is API. And again, the same thing is drawn here. It's a very simplified idea. Any request which comes in will be first coming into the controller. The controller will then look at whatever services are available, right? So this is an extended version called the MVCS architecture. So you already know what MVC is. And another layer is a service layer, right? So this is addition of the service layer. Now what this means is the controller is there, the model is already there in the form of database, the view is also there, view sits here, correct? Now what the service layer does is it just adds another layer here. So for example, the request comes in at /order because I want, say, order from some place. So what this controller will do is it will forward your request to the order service. Now the order service will do its own work. Maybe it will fetch data from the database. It will do some business logic and send the request back to the controller. The controller will then send it back to the view. So this is the entire flow here. So just to recap, this is what the MVC looks like. The user sends a request to the controller. The controller then interacts with the model, right? So the controller will be interacting with the model, will take the model and send that model to the view. And the view will render the image and send it to the user, right? So this is the entire flow. So don't worry about it too much. It's just a very popular architecture which I wanted to touch upon. Okay, now let's look at what if they have any questions here so far. Okay, let me go back. Where was I? Where did I leave it? Okay, yeah, this is where I bought. Definition code, easy understanding. So how about login tomorrow? And tips for making good documentation. Okay, we'll be covering some tips on documentation later on when I show you where you have to submit your projects. So you'll be submitting your projects on my GitHub repository. So there is where you'll write some documentation about it as well. So we'll be covering some few tips on that later on. All right. So okay, so you're not able to understand what API is. So as I told you, API is a very basic kind of contract. You don't have to really understand it in very depth here. Just think of it as a contract. Will be very much clear when you look at the code later on. So just hang on for a bit. When we look at the code, you'll have some better idea of what the API thing is, what is the routing, how the requests are coming in. So all of that will be covered when you look at the code later on. All right. Now let's just see what here is. Is an MVC depreciated? Yeah, it is not so far followed, but it's very, very popular and very easy to understand architecture here. So whenever you're trying to build some architecture, you can always use this concepts in any case, right? So controller is something which is really important. You can look up aggregator pattern, which is really popular way of handling microservices. So you can look at aggregator pattern, and this is also lines up pretty well with that. But it's not a part of the discussion here, so we'll not cover that. Okay, so you're getting already, but not good idea about all these things. Okay, so don't worry about being a fresher or worry about any of the frameworks here. We're just covering very basic concepts here. Don't have to worry about any of the implementation stuff so far. When it comes to implementation, I'll be guiding you through it. I'll be going through very slowly on how to implement all of that stuff, but that's no problem here. Yeah, data is a model is just a representation of the data which is being sent. So don't worry about that too much. Okay, so MVC you can just research about it a bit on your own, but it's not really important for this context here. Okay. Yeah, the model is it's not exactly a schema, but it represents your schema in your code. So you need to have some way of representing your table in code, right? You can't just take the entire table. You have to have some kind of a way of transferring the data from database into your code. So you do that using classes, right? So classes is part of the model. Is controller like an API? Exactly, yeah. It's somewhat like an API. It exposes the different functions of your application and then sends it to it exposes all of that functions to your front end. So it's kind of an API, correct? It's true. It's an interface for your application. That is why it's an API. Right? How do you choose suitable architectural system? So this is something which is very open-ended. So you can research about what kind of application you're building, and depending on that, you'll be able to find out, okay, what is the best architecture needs. So there is something called as design patterns. Many of you may have heard of that term. So you can check those things out. Design patterns are really codified best practices. So this just tell you that, okay, depending on this situation, this is the best architecture you should follow, or this is the best practice you should follow. So you can search for design patterns in any language of your choice. If you're following Java, you can search for design patterns in Java, and then you can look at whatever your use case is. That way you'll be knowing what is the best practice for that. Difference between SOAP and REST API, that is something which we'll cover later on. When we cover REST API, I'll be talking about what SOAP is, what REST API is, not now. API is interface, exactly, yes. So I in API stands for interface, and this is the interface which helps you to program your application. Right? So you have an application which is running. Now this is some kind of an interface for your application which will allow it to communicate with different services. That is what API is essentially. Are there other kinds of architecture? Definitely there are multiple kinds of architecture. We'll not be covering those things right now, but yeah, you can also explore that on your own. Is it Spring MVC what you explained? Yeah, Spring MVC is kind of a library which allows you to build MVC applications. You can check it out on your own. I haven't covered Spring yet in this course, but that was something which you can check it out, which is really interesting and really industry standard so far. Mvc standard, what am I doing yet? This is something I can't answer. Is Node.js more common for defining model or Java model? This is something which is again open-ended. So Java is I've written in Java and Node.js both. So there is not really any preference or some kind of that. But in mostly in industry, a lot of people use Java more than Node.js is what I know. Okay, so far we have answered all the questions here. Let's just get back to the entire section. REST versus GraphQL. This is something which we'll cover later on, not here. Okay. So far, let me just recap. We've understood what front end and what backend is basically. We have some idea of what API is. It's an interface for allowing your application to communicate with different kind of applications, either front end or backend. Right? So communication between different backends, between backend and front end, all of that is facilitated using an API. An API is something which is an interface. It defines what are different functions which your backend exposes, and those functions can be used by different services which want to interact with your application. Right? So this is the API, and we understood using a very intuitive understanding of a restaurant and a waiter, where the menu is kind of the contract which you give, and the waiter will take this contract to the backend and serve your request. That is the idea behind the API thing. In the activity, we covered like the inspect elements to see what the front end is, what different components in the front end, and what the back end is as well. So we also looked at what are the different URLs the front end is calling in order to fetch data or send data in the payload form. All right, and then we just have a very small discussion on what MVC architecture is. Not really important in this context, but something which you should know. All right. Now coming back to APIs. So what are external APIs? So we have understood that API act as a kind of middleman or contract, correct? Which allows different services to communicate with each other, correct? Now, what are these different services? Right. So for example, so far we looked at, say, the restaurant example, right? So we looked at the kitchen as a backend, and it has an API, which is the menu card, and you can interact with the kitchen using the menu card, right? That is the basic idea we had. Now, let's just take a more real life understanding of what APIs are, right? So for example, say I have multiple backends, correct? So say I have one backend which I developed on my own, right? So I wrote one application and I exposed it through some API, correct? So is that the only API which I can use? Or can I use API which is written by some other people? For example, if I write an application, can I expose that application to you guys? So can you folks also access those applications using some kind of an API which I expose, right? That is entirely true, which is called the external APIs. So basically what external API is not a new term. It's just English, nothing else. So what external API is the same thing, that you use applications which are developed by some other people using the APIs which they expose, right? So maybe if I want to access, say, the weather channel, right? So we're looking at all the examples below here. So let's just see here. So this is the idea behind it. So you have a consumer application. Maybe this is the application which I'm building. Let's just say on React, on Flutter, or whatever different modes I want. And this is the application which I'm developing basically. And I want to have data from multiple services. Say I want data from, say, weather service. I want data from, say, restaurant service, and multiple other backends, right? So I can easily use the APIs which they expose to get the data back. So remember we talked about the Telegram example as well. So for example, let's just say this is the Telegram API. I want to send some information to Telegram, and okay, let's just imagine I have an application which wants to send notifications through multiple channels, right? So maybe I want to send from a notification to backend to Facebook, one to, say, WhatsApp, and one to Telegram, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to access the APIs for all the different services. Now I'm not writing the APIs on my own, right? I'm just using this contract. All of this backend is part of the difference. For example, this backend one can be the Facebook backend, right? So I don't have access to the Facebook backend. I can just use this API in order to modify the backend, right? So this is what I'm doing here. So this is Facebook, this is WhatsApp, say, and more other things here, correct? So this is the idea behind external API. So what you do is you use the applications which somebody else have built using APIs that they have exposed. All right. Now, very common examples for this can be cognitive services. So you may have heard of many applications that employ machine learning, right? So you may think of it as a very complex say use case, but it's really not a very complex use case. For example, if I develop an application which tries to identify whether an image is a dog or cat, or say any kind of image, I want a particular image to be classified as some kind of an object. So do I need to write the machine learning model myself? Do I have to train the model or send the data to a model? No, of course not. So all of this is already available through different applications. So you can take example of the Microsoft Azure Cognitive Services. So Microsoft Azure already has a trained models ready for you to use. Now, how are you going to use this model? You're going to use this model using some APIs, correct? So we'll be looking at this specific example in the application which I have built. So I'll show you how that is done, how you can use, say, cognitive services to achieve very, very complex tasks using a very simple application. So you look at my application, is very simple, just few lines of code. And you see even the few lines of code, you can access very complex tasks like, say, speech recognition, image recognition, or other kinds of tasks using external APIs. So these are applications which are developed by Microsoft and hosted by Microsoft, but you can use those applications with some fee, or mostly there are a lot of time they are free as well. But this is the idea behind external APIs. Also, you can see this AccuWeather API. Now let's just visit this thing right ahead. So we'll be having a better idea. So you can look at AccuWeather APIs. It's another way of exposing it. So you can see you have multiple options here. Let's just look at the forecast API. Now, what is this forecast API? So you'll see this is a kind of a description here, correct? So I'll just zoom in a bit. So yeah, so this is the endpoint. So remember we saw an endpoint in the inspect element part as well. So that is also something which we saw earlier. And this is the backend here. So what is the backend? This is dataservice.accuweather.com. This is the URL for the server of AccuWeather, right? So this is where all of AccuWeather's data is being hosted, right? So I don't have access to the server directly. All I can do is I can make requests at some specific endpoints, right? So you can see /forecast, right? So this is called an endpoint. So this is the URL part, and everything after this is called an endpoint. So this is /forecast is one endpoint, /v1 /daily /one day. So all of this is part of something which is called REST architecture, which we'll be discussing in the next section. But for now, all I want you to understand is, okay, this is the API which is being developed and exposed by some external service, right? So AccuWeather is the owner of this entire information, and it is allowing us as users to consume these APIs, right? So whatever application which I'm building, I can easily just call this particular URL. I can even visit it on my browser here, but I have to supply an API key and all of that stuff later on. So this is basically the idea behind it. So I don't know how AccuWeather sources its data. How does AccuWeather get its data? What are the different applications that AccuWeather performs? All of that information is in the backend of AccuWeather, which is hosted by AccuWeather on its own service, right? We don't have any information of that. All we can do is use this API to get the information when we want to use it, right? So I can easily get the daily forecast, I can get 10 days forecast, hourly forecast. All of these things can be easily available from AccuWeather's your server by just using this API here. This is kind of a contract which I'm looking at. It's kind of a menu chart when you look at a kitchen, right? So this is different options which I can avail. I can get the 1 hour forecast, I can get 12-hour forecast. All of this information is something which is exposed by AccuWeather and which we can use as consumers, right? And this is the idea behind APIs, external APIs. Yeah, and sometimes you have to pay for these APIs, of course, because all of this information is not free. Because AccuWeather is hosting this API at some cost to it. They're also sourcing data from somewhere and is giving that data to you. So it mostly takes some kind of charge in some cases. But we're looking at some free examples as well later on. So that's not an issue. Okay. How do you choose Attachable architecture where system is done? API interface. Okay, I've answered this question here. What is REST assured? Okay, so REST is just an architecture. So REST, we'll look at REST in the next section. We'll cover all of that there. So not here. Which is controller in real-time system? I don't understand this question yet. Okay, I think we are good with the questions here. Okay, let's just go back to the OneNote and we'll continue later on. Okay, so we have covered external APIs so far. We know what APIs are, what external APIs are. Now let us finally come to the section where we see how the communication happens, right? So how does communication happen with different services? It happens with something which is called REST, right? So REST is just an architectural style, right? So you have multiple ways in which you can communicate with different services. So one of them is called SOAP. A lot of you mentioned SOAP in the comments as well. So SOAP is also a protocol. It's kind of way in which different services can interact with each other. REST, on the other hand, is also kind of an architecture which defines how the communication between two different services takes place. Okay, it is not really a very hard concept to understand, but you can just look at what the principles are on your own. This is a task which I'm giving you. You can read about the 6 principles about REST. This will help you some idea of what these things are. Let's look at this diagram first of all, which will help you to understand this entire thing better. Okay, so what REST API essentially is this. So you have a backend, correct? You have this backend here, and you're exposing this backend through some API, and this API will be accessed by some frontend, correct? Now, how do I structure my API in such a way that is easy for my frontend to access, right? So first of all, you may have looked at things like this, right? So slash API slash user. So we looked at a lot of different APIs on the internet where we saw the slash notation where we get to the whatever data we want using the slash notification on the endpoint, right? So this is a part of the REST architecture. So what REST tells you is that when you're developing a backend, you need to expose it on some endpoints here. So for example, if I'm looking at get order is one of the functions which I'm exposing in my backend, right? So what I'll do is I'll have this entire URL here, say HTTP, whatever URL my backend is hosted at. And after that, I'll be specifying, say, order, this endpoint here, right? So this is a way in which I specify, okay, this is what I want, order, then order ID, say order ID 1. And then I'll just say, I want to get this request, right? So this is the request which I make using the the REST architecture. So REST architecture defines how you want to define your app backend. What is the architecture you want to follow while building your backend is something which REST defines. Okay, so you can check out the 6 principles. So all of the 6 principles basically cover each of these things. So maybe you want to have separate client, separate server. You want to know how the communication between these things different happens, and this happens mostly through HTTP. So if you're not familiar with HTTP, I encourage you to read up on that. But most of the communication happens in REST through HTTP, and the response types here as JSON. So you can think of it in this way as you can either have XML. You may have heard of what XML is and what is JSON. So I'll just go through it very briefly here. So XML and JSON, these are just data exchange formats. These are data exchange formats. What are data exchange formats? This is the way in which you send data between different parts. So remember in the earlier example, we talked about order, right? So I had an order class. I had an order class which had an order ID and an order name, correct? Now, how do I send this class through the network to some other service, right? So how do I make that happen? So I define a kind of a JSON object. So JSON object is just a very kind of in curly braces. I can just say order, and then I can specify ID. So it's just a way in which I can send data between different applications. So for example, my backend might be written in Java and my frontend might be written in React.js, right? In JavaScript. So how does my Java object translate to the React object, right? So this is something which has to be taken care of. So we choose a very common stream, which uses a very common format in which first the Java converts my object into that particular format, which is JSON. And when it is received at the front end, JSON is converted back to whatever JavaScript object you want to convert, right? So it's just a way of exchanging information between different services, what JSON is. XML is pretty much the same thing, right? So just a very easy way of communicating with different services. That's what JSON response is. So you can look at this again. This is my client application. This is my client application. Let's just see, right? So this is the client. This is my backend. Say this is my backend exposed through an API. There's the backend. Now, what I'm doing is basically this. I'm making these requests here, these HTTP requests. You may be familiar with the get command. If you're not, I'll just tell you in a very short way. HTTP is a way of communicating different. It's a protocol, and it has multiple different verbs. So you can check out HTTP verbs. So you have get, you have post, you have put, all of these things. What this essentially means is it defines what kind of operation you want to perform. So if I'm telling I want get, right? So I'm expecting some kind of information to be received from the backend. If I'm doing a post, say, in that case, I'll be expecting to send some information to the server. So it's just a way of specifying what you want from the backend, right? So this is that is the entire idea behind get, post, and put, all of that things. So what I'm doing here is this. This is my REST API. What I'm doing is I'm sending a get request at this particular endpoint, right? So whatever URL my server is hosted at, after that I'm doing an /API. It doesn't have to be this, right? It can be anything you want, right? The /API is not necessary. You can have /x, /a, /b, /j, whatever name you want. So it just depends on how you are designing your backend. So when you're looking at the code, you'll be understanding it much better that way, right? So this is the kind of request you make using the backend, and then this is the response you get back. So you can see the response is in the form of JSON, right? it is not sending any Java object or some other object because we don't know what the front end language is. It can be JavaScript, it can be Node.js, it can be say Python or any other stuff, right? So it just sends an HTTP response in the form of JSON objects here. And then in the front end, this will be parsed into whatever language you want, correct? So this is the idea behind REST. So the REST is just a way of defining this architecture. Okay, this is how the communication will be. This is how it should be, right? So difference between REST and SOAP is something which I'll encourage you to check out on your own. So basically what SOAP does is, doesn't have to be here, so you don't have to worry about this. I'm just answering this for people who have asked this question. So SOAP is also one of the architectures. Now what this does is, it just sends an envelope. So this envelope will have, okay, maybe we will not cover this here because it will just confuse a lot of people. So what you can do is you can search for SOAP versus REST API. It's really very lot of videos available on YouTube for that. So we'll not be covering that here, just confuse a lot of people. So in just this case, just remember that REST is a way of defining your architecture for your backend, how it has to be structured, how it has to be accessed, what is the response type, how the communication happens, what is GET request, what is different HTTP code. This is the basic idea behind REST. So REST is a way of communicating between different applications, right? So API, how do you make API calls using this structure, right? So when we looked at, say, the AccuWeather APIs, you may remember you saw something very similar. You saw a get thing, you saw an endpoint here. So even when you looked at the inspect element chart, you saw some kind of request method, right? It said get, post, all of that things, right? So all of that is part of the HTTP request mode, right? So you can learn more about it later on, but this is the basic idea behind how REST API works. And any architecture, any backend which you build, which follows the REST principle, is called a RESTful backend. If you're building a service which follows all the REST principles, it's called a RESTful service, right? So you can just read about the principles on your own. It just covers whatever I've covered in this entire discussion here. You can read about this for better clarity. So we'll skip that for now. Okay, so I hope this is done. Now let's just do some hands-on, right? So we've done a lot of theoretical discussion on REST and API calls. Let's just actually go and perform some kind of calls for it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to say find a dummy service, right? So I'll just find a dummy REST API. Let's just see. What this is just doing is just giving me some endpoint to hit. All right. So okay, now I've opened this entire contract. Now this might be familiar to you, correct? So this is kind of a menu again. This is a kind of contract. Okay, so I don't know where this thing is hosted. Where is REST API example hosted? What server it is? What is the function? I have no idea of that. What I know is these are the functions I can call, right? So this is defined here. These are the following public APIs, right? So these are open to the public. Okay, so I can see I have a /employee endpoint. So this is again the REST architecture. So you're defining all of your functions as endpoints. You're defining a different endpoint. So I know /employee/employee/id, all of that, right? So this is the route. So this part here up till the .com part is the URL for my server. So this is a server which REST API is hosting. And this is the API which is going to access, which is /API/v1/employees. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Postman. Now Postman is just a very easy, handy tool which allows you to make requests to different services. So here you can specify what kind of request I want. So I can say get request, I can say post, I can choose different kind of HTTP verbs all around here, right? And this is the part where I specify what is the endpoint I'm going to make the request to. All right. So say for example, I'm making a request to say employees, because this is something which you saw in this part here as well, right? So what it does a get method. The type is JSON, I get a JSON response back. This is the root, and description is get all employee data. So what I'm going to do is when I make this request, I should receive all the employee data from the server. So I'll do a send here, right? So sending the request to the dummy API service server, right? So just a second. Yeah, I think it's too many requests. I'll just send it again. There's no issues there. Okay, yeah, this is part. Let me just remove this part here. Let me look at the params here. It's all good. Yeah, I think it's being currently loaded for too many requests because this is a free service. It has some kind of rate limitation happening here. So you're not able to access the URL currently, but you can do it from your own end. You can just search for dummy.rest API example. You can download Postman, or you can do it from your any kind of terminal and try to send the request to this one. So if you use a Postman, you really get a very good idea of what headers is, what is the body. So remember we talked about payload before. So payload is the body part. So you can send any information you want in the body of it part. So I'm trying to post some information. I can post that using this part here. That is the basic idea behind making REST APIs. So we're not able to access it right now because of maybe a lot of people are using this API maybe. This is the idea behind making REST API calls. This is the architecture. This is how you define it, and this is the way you get the data back. All right. Now let me see if I have some questions. How do you make a call to the API based on the weather? What are the arguments it is expecting? Exactly. So when you have questions like this, the best way to answer this is go to the API reference, right? For example, if you want to understand what is the price of paneer, right? So you have to look at the menu again. So this is where you look at what are the different details, right? So what is the information I want to supply? What is the information I'll get back? All of that is handled in this API reference here. So any API you're going to use, you'll have an API reference. For example, even look at say, we'll just look at this particular example. We won't digress further. So let's just say I want to get this one. I'll just click on daily forecast, right? So I want to understand what is the request I want to send, what is the response I'll get back. So now here is the query parameters, right? So these are the query parameters which are going to send along with this request, right? So you'll be sending an API key. As I told you, API key is required in some cases where you want to pay for the service. So you have to get an API key after you register with this service, and then you have to supply this API key here. Then you have to supply what language you want, what details you want, metric and all this stuff here, and then you'll get the response back. And what is the response that you'll get? Response is this way. So a response will have a code here, whatever code with the response is there, and these are response parameters. So you'll get an effective date, you'll get severity, you will get category. So all of these are different parameters which will get temperature, air pollen, day icon. All of that is information which you'll get from the response. Correct? This is the idea behind it. So any API which you want to use, check the API reference, click on the API reference, look at what parameters you have to supply and what are the parameters you will get back from the API. This is how you define it. So it's just kind of a contract here, correct? So this is the contract which you're going to use to understand it. So without knowing this, you can't easily use an API. You won't even know what data to send, what data to expect back, right? So this is really important. Good question about that. All right. So we didn't cover this earlier. Okay. Now from BP background, it's possible to get in the developing field. Yeah, of course, you can always start developing and any experience before. Can an application front end be in two tech stack and communicate with the same backend? Of course it can be. So that is the beauty of having different applications, right? So when you look at my application which I have built, the backend is in Node.js and the front end is in Python. Now the front end can be multiple different front ends. So you can imagine that you are accessing this YouTube from your laptop. Some of you may be using it from the phone. So all of the different platforms. So these are built in different languages, but they're accessing the same backend. Correct? So you don't have to have separate backends for different parts. So when you expose an API, you expose some kind of a contract, right? Now, who is accessing this contract? Can be anybody, right? So I'm exposing this API here. There can be multiple frontends. This can be frontend 2 which is accessing this API. So I can have any language, any tech stack, any kind of application running anywhere which can access this API, correct? So if you looked at this AccuWeather API thing, I could make the request right away from the browser itself. I didn't have to have an application, right? So this API can be accessed by anybody. This URL can be accessed through the browser, through some application, through another backend service. So that is entirely flexible, right? So you don't have to worry about building separate backends for different services. The backend is going to be common for everything. All right. Can an application front end, this is done? How the path is being created when API is created? All right. Let me just, sorry about that. Yeah. How is the path created when API is created? Example, /API/user ID. Okay. Yeah. Here, how path is created, who creates it? Exactly. So since this is an external API means this is defined by AccuWeather, right? So this is something which AccuWeather defines on its own. So let's just get back to this API. So say for example, I'm looking at this particular endpoint here, /forecasts/v1/daily/1day/location. So this is defined by AccuWeather. So the AccuWeather's developers, when they wrote their backend, they exposed 1-day daily forecast at this particular location. Right, so whenever you are writing your own backend, so for example, in the future, when you're writing your own service, say you're redeveloping some kind of application which needs to be exposed, in that scenario, you're going to choose yourself at what endpoint you're going to expose what different services. So if you look at this two different endpoints here, you can see that these are very similar in terms of this /forecast/v1/daily, and instead of 1 day, here is 10 day, right? So it's just a way of organizing things. So the developers of AccuWeather, they build this API in such a way that, okay, at different endpoints, I'll be mapping it to different functions. And that is the idea behind it. And this was decided by the AccuWeather developers. You can't modify that on your own. So when you're building your own application, in that case, it's your choice entirely. You can either have /1day, /10day, or whatever other names you want for your own application. So since this is an external API, all you can do is read and apply. You can't modify the endpoints here. So when you're building your own, I'll be showing that to you as well. When you look at the code, you see I have defined my own endpoint. I can change the endpoint as I want, right? There is not an issue. We'll be experimenting that. It's really, really cool thing to do. How do you learn to parse the reply in the form of JSON that comes back? Exactly. So there are a lot of different libraries which help you with that. So in case of Java, you can read about Jackson. Jackson is a library which allows you to convert that. So it's really not something which you have to implement on your own. So any language that you're going to use, let's just experiment. Let's just look at Python JSON parsing, right? So this is very, very simple, right? So it's very read, write, and parse JSON using Python. So you can check out any link which you want. There are multiple different libraries for it. So JSON in itself is a library in Python if you look at it. So let's say you have this, say import JSON. So this is the idea. So you have a JSON string here, right? So you have a JSON string. How it is being parsed? It is being parsed using JSON.loads. JSON provides you and just takes and loads into dictionary here. So you don't have to write the entire code yourself, right? So JSON is something which you receive from the request, and this is how you'll parse the request into some kind of a dictionary or say a Java object or any kind of language you want. So every language will have some libraries which you will be able to use to parse the JSON into whatever objects you want to parse into. Correct? So don't worry about that. JSON is just used for transferring data. At both the ends, you'll have to have some kind of software, some kind of library which is going to parse that response, right? That is the idea. Okay, what happens if API is changed by provider and removed? Okay, so if the API itself is changed, in that case, your application which is using the API also needs to be modified, right? So if the implementation changes, in that case, you don't have to worry about it. Say if the API remains constant, say this is the same API which AccuWeather is using, but it's changing how it's implemented. Let's just say it just sends you some kind of an average instead of maximum. So whatever implementation changes happen in the background, that won't break your application. But say, for example, if they change this endpoint, so instead of forecast, they just make it v1 directly. So in that case, all of your code which is using this URL needs to be changed. Otherwise, your application will break. Right? That is the idea behind it. All right. So I think this is covered for now. Let's just go back. Okay. So we have looked at REST. We have looked at APIs and stuff. We have understand what this thing is. Now, finally, we'll get to the point where we actually look at the code. And now you'll have a much better understanding of all the different, how you define paths, how you change paths, how you access paths. All of that will be covered here. Okay, cool. So let's just recap fast. So in the previous section, we have defined how resources can be exposed through a contract like the API, which defines how two or more servers share information, right? So you have some resources which you want to share. You build a backend. Say resources, I just mean database. So you have some database or information you want to share with the world. You just build a backend. You expose the backend to some kind of an API contract, and then this is used by different kind of applications all around the world. All right, that is the idea behind it. How APIs can be self-hosted or can be hosted by external maintainers. Exactly. So if you're building an application yourself, your API is going to be hosted by yourself, or maybe on your laptop or your own VM or some other place. If you're using the APIs by other people, it will be hosted by their own servers, right? So you saw the AccuWeather.com was the server for the AccuWeather APIs, right? So this is the idea behind it. You also learned what REST architecture is. So the basic idea behind what REST is just using the different kind of architecture styles. I encourage you to read the principles so you have a better understanding of that. And lastly, we will see how we can access the data using the HTTP call. So we looked at this diagram here. We had some idea of what HTTP calls are. We also looked at Postman here. This is how you make an HTTP call. You define what kind of request you want, get request, post request. You specify what kind of endpoint you want to send the information to. And you can send, say, body. You can send some data in the form of this part. You can send some parameters here. You can look at authentication. All different parts are handled separately here, right? This is the idea behind making HTTP calls. Now we're going to implement all of this on our own, and we'll see how it works, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to build a server of our own, and we're going to expose it using a client, right? So what we're going to do is this is the architecture of diagram of what I'm going to build here. So as I told, I always build the architecture first, and then I build the application, right? So this is the architecture diagram. So this will be a server. I'll build a server, any language you want, right? So I've chosen Node.js as my language of choice, but you can choose any language you want. You can build a server. As I told you, the communication happens through JSON, right? So it is converted at both ends in different languages. So it doesn't really matter what language you're using, right? So I can choose any language of my choice. The conversion will always be taking place anyways, correct? So I'll be building a server. I'll choose any language I want and expose some functions. And those functions will be defined at my own path, as I mentioned. I can choose whatever path I want. I can choose whatever function name I want. And I'll expose all of this functionality as API to my client. Now my client can be also written in any language I want. It can be in Python, it can be in JavaScript, any language I want. And this will be performing HTTP calls to my backend to get the information back. All right. So this will make an HTTP request and get an HTTP response back. This is the idea. Now let's just go to the code first. All right. Now this is my server. Okay. Let's just look at the server file. Let me just contract all of that. So this is a demo folder here. This is a server. The server has a file called server.js. So you can observe this is written in JavaScript. So even if you have no idea what JavaScript is, I'll just run you through this entire idea once here. So just ignore all of this part here. You don't have to worry about all of that. I have just defined a port here. So whenever you're exposing some kind of a backend, you expose it at some URL and some port, correct? So if I am hosting a backend, currently I will be hosting this on my local host. I'll be hosting it on my own laptop here, right? I'll be hosting it on my laptop at port 3000, right? So anytime if you're familiar with some CS concepts, you'll understand that any communication which happens between different services, it happens at some IP address plus port. So already you can think of it as an address of some sorts, right? So street plus house number, some sort of that way. So it's IP address plus port, which tells you where your application is hosted, right? So for example, for my client to access this server, it needs to know the IP address and the port number as well, right? This is the idea behind. So I've defined a port here, and this is where I define the path. So a lot of people are asking, where do you define path? This is where I define it. So what I'm doing is I'm defining a get function at /endpoint, just a normal base endpoint. What I can do is I can just copy this, right? I can just maybe add another endpoint. So I can do say /forecast, right? So similar to what we saw in AccuWeather. So I'll define the /forecast endpoint. So whatever URL my server will be hosted at, if you go to /forecast, you'll be getting this response back. So I'll just modify this response here. Let me just say windy. This is the response. It's a very simple application. Of course, you can just build anything you want here. All right. And now I'll be listening at this port now. So this is a very JavaScript specific syntax. You don't have to worry about any of that. Just see what the flow is, what the idea is. So you're exposing at different, this is my backend. This is my backend, right? And this is the API. So API in itself, again, is not something which you see. An API is defined in this way. So API is just something which you describe on some web page. So if I want to expose my application, I'll create a similar web page as the AccuWeather page. I'll just create a page. I'll define, okay, these are the endpoints. These are the information get. This is the request you have to make. This is the response you'll get back. Right? And this is the idea I have to send. So I've exposed two different functions, slash and /forecast, and I'm listening at port here. So let me just run this server here. Okay, so already listening at port 3000. I'll just stop it. I'll do it again. Yeah, because it's changed the configuration here. Yeah, so example app listening at HTTP localhost 3000. So this is the URL for my server, and this is the port here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll go to the client now. My server is ready. My backend is intact. My backend has two functions, a slash which says say hello world, and a /forecast which just returns the windy as a forecast. I can add some more business logic here. If I have a database, I can fetch data from the database at this particular stage. For example, if I have some kind of database here, so that step will be covered in this part, right? So database fetching will be happening here. For example, if I really have an actual weather database, I can just get the actual value instead of just printing out windy, correct? Database fetching, all of that will happen in this part. Now I have to define a client which is going to access this web server, right? So again, this client is in Python. So it can mean any language of choice. These don't have to be the same language again. Now in the Python, again, I've defined a URL first of all. This is my URL, correct? So a localhost 3000 slash. So you can imagine this is /endpoint, which should get me a hello world response back from the server. And I'm making this request using this get function here. So again, there are multiple libraries which you can use. So you don't have to worry about implementation yourself. So you don't have to worry about it. If you look at the Postman implementation, you see there's a get, there's all of these things here. So all of this is available through different HTTP libraries, right? So you can get a request library from Python, and you can use it to make a get request. You specify what URL you want, and you can print the response back. Okay. Now what I'll do is I'll just run this Python script here. So let me just run this. So when I run this application, this is going to make a request to localhost 3000. Right? This is the URL, this is the endpoint which my server is running currently. And what is the endpoint? The endpoint is slash. So you can see the output here is hello world. Right? So this is the hello world output which I get from the server back. Correct? This is the idea. Now what I'm going to do is maybe I'll just change the endpoint. Now I'm going to change it to forecast. Forecast. Now let me just check if I have the same spelling here. Forecasts. Yeah, there's no typos. Now what I'm going to do is I can run this app again. I'll run the client again. Say it says windy, right? So I've accessed a different API. So the URL is still the same. I'm just accessing different endpoints, and all the different endpoints are being exposed to this server here, right? So this is my server. It is exposed different endpoints and having different kind of responses back. This is the idea behind it. Now, once all of this is covered, I just want you to look at another kind of client here. So this was an example of whatever we saw right now, was an example of a self-hosted API. So I hosted the server.js API, and I access this API using my own client. Now this client AI file, this is going to use Microsoft's backend, right? So you can see my URL is not localhost anymore. It is not something which I have built on. It is Vision API, WJS cognitive services.azure.com. So it is hosted by Azure, Microsoft Azure, and it is a Vision API, correct? So this is not something which I have built, and this endpoint is something which I don't have any control over, right? So this /vision/3.2 /read, all of that is defined by Azure's developer, right? Similarly, in the same way I defined it here, Azure's developer defined it in this way, correct? This is the image, and this is some headers which I have to pass in, right? So usually I have to pass an API key, as I told you, because these services are not free. I have a subscription with Azure, so I know what my key is. So I've defined the key here, and I'm using the key using this part. I also encourage you to find out what is the best way of storing keys. This is something which you can check out later on. Whatever, this is not really important in this context. Okay, so this is the URL. This is my headers which are defined here. So headers are basically data which you send at the top of a request, right? So you can say, I send my authentication information, I send say any kind of say host name which I want. All of this is part of the headers. So don't worry about that. Data is the payload. Again, I told you about payload. So this is data which I'm sending. This is the image URL. Right? What image do I want to classify? So this vision API will help me to identify my images, right? So whatever image I send here, this will send me some information about the image back. So this is the data, right? So now I'm making a post request instead of get request because I'm sending some information to the server, correct? So I'm making a post request to this particular URL with the particular headers which are defined here. And this is the payload which I have. This is the payload, which is the URL, data URL. Now I'm going to make a call to this, let's just say client AI is my file. I just make a call to this one. So now my front end is going to make a call to Azure's backend. And we're going to get information from Azure in terms of whatever response we get back, correct? This is something which is interesting as well. So this is a very, this says failed to download image. I think there's some problem with Azure's service. Maybe failed to download image from the input. Okay. Anyways, you just get the idea that I'm making this call to Azure's page, and it is not able to download this image for some reason, but we'll not be going to debugging that. It will cost a lot of time. But I just want you to understand this idea that, okay, now I'm writing a very simple application. You can see just a very few lines of code, and I'm able to write, I'm able to use machine learning APIs from Azure directly. And this is how the API calls are made, basically. So this is very, very important. This is something which I've covered. Now let me go back to my YouTube, see what we have here. Yeah, let's just go back here. Okay. Can a backend server get hacked by their APIs? Of course, like there are multiple ways in which you can do it. But of course, this is something which is a point of debate. There are multiple ways in which you can say send malicious data to your API and it'll respond in some other ways, which is maybe send you back the API key or something like that. There are multiple ways. I don't touch on that. I don't have information on it on my own. I'm not an expert in hacking. So that is something which I can't answer very satisfactorily. So how do you learn is done. What happens is this is covered. How do you fetch frontend and backend together? This is something which I don't understand. We don't fetch backend and frontend together. This is not something which you do. You just fetch data from the backend for the frontend. That is what it is. What if you want to tweak? Thank you. What if you want to tweak the data that is there in the backend and they may not be able to be got by simple get to put methods? So any kind of information can be tweaked by using CRUD, these functions. So if you want to say change this kind of information you want, you can just put for updating any kind of information you have. You can get, you can post. So all of these things are sufficient to manipulate whatever data you have at the backend. So please show client side in Java, just simple example. So for client side in Java, you can easily search for the examples. So I'll show you how it is done. So just look for Java, say client, Java client application REST call. So if you look at this example, you'll get RESTful Java client with java.net. So that is just, so it's very simple here. So it's just making a GET request again. You can see this is exposing this. So maybe you can check it out on your own. This is the client again. Very simple, don't have to worry about. Just define a URL and just define a connection. Just make the connection URL. That's all. So very simple there. Okay. That's all. So once we have covered all of that here, now what I'm going to do is, since we now understand what APIs are, how to make a call on your own, what is server and stuff, I'm going to give you a task here. So this is the project which you're going to build over this weekend. So I'm going to click on this link here. This will open the Crio hub. Right? So project hub has a very good application here, which you're going to build. So this is the objective. So far you've understood what APIs is, what backend is, how you make calls on different services. Now you're going to use all of that information in building a very useful application, right? So what this app does is, it is going to take information about cricket scores from some service. Like we fetch the weather data from AccuWeather, you're going to fetch some cricket scores from some service like Cricinfo or say Sportskeeda or whatever different websites that host the different kind of data here. So what you're going to do is essentially going to take data from those APIs, and then you're going to take this data and send it to a Telegram channel. This is the idea behind it. So basically, if you look at the architecture here, you may think of it in this way. So don't look at this one here. I'll just give you a very slight idea of it. So basically what you're doing, you have to communicate with two different APIs, right? So you have a Telegram service and you have a Crick info service. The Crick info service is going to send you information, right? It's going to send you some data back. So you have to communicate between using the Crick info API. After you've gotten the data, now you have to send this data to a Telegram channel. And for that to happen, again, you have to make use of Telegram's API, correct? So you have to make two API calls here, and that is the challenge part of it, right? So you can try doing it up to the third module here, which is sending notification. 4 and 5 are just more modification which you can make if you're free and if you have some more knowledge. Don't worry about it. All of this references are available everywhere here. So you have requirements, you have expected outcome, you have references. You can follow along with this. You can even download the project on your laptop again. And this is a very, very good way of following things and knowing how to go about building applications on your own. So it's very, very useful application, and it's very useful because it is developing such an important concept in your mind. You can extend this to have, say, a WhatsApp group, so some kind of, say, Slack channel or, say, email. So don't think of it as a very limited kind of scope. You can use the concept which you have learned here to build any kind of application. So instead of Crick info, maybe you can get data from Cyclone information or some other kind of data, right? So that is the basic idea behind all of that. So you have to follow this particular project here. I'll be sending the link in the chat again, and I'm also posting it in the description later on. So this is something which is there. Now you can follow this project, build whatever you want, and you have to submit this project after this weekend ends. So maybe on Monday, I'll set a deadline when you have to send the project here, and where you have to submit is something which I'll show you. So this is my repository. I'll be posting the link again in the chat. We'll also be posting it on some kind of, say, on an email or other communications with you. It'll also be in the YouTube description here. So when you can come back, you can check the description and you will find all these links here. I'll be posting it there. So this is the place where you have to create a pull request for your application. Now, so I'll just show you the contributor.md file here. So it's a very basic idea. You have to just fork this particular repository. If you're not familiar with GitHub, I'll encourage you to learn more about how GitHub works and what are different. We'll not be covering those concepts here again, but maybe in the future we'll have some video on GitHub later on. But for now, what you do is you have to just you have to fork this repository. You can learn more about these steps again later on. You have to create a separate folder in the base directory with your username as its name, and you have to add all of your files there, right? So if you look at the repository structure here, it's the same as what we saw. So there's a demo folder, which is the folder which I have built, right? So we have looked at the client and the server part, right? This is demo which you want. What you have to do is you have to fork this repository. You have to create another folder here. Say if you have username XYZ, you have to create a folder called XYZ and then add all of your files inside. After you're done with that, you have to come up to the README part. README part is a contributors list. And so you have to add your name, your username, and some description about what you have built, right? So maybe if you had some modifications which you built in the prior projects thing, you have to add that here. You have to add a description here and just commit all of that and create a pull request to this particular repository again, right? So all of those things will be hosted right here. And I'll be reviewing all the applications and I'll be selecting the best projects in the next week for a lot of prizes there. So we'll be sharing with you what prizes there are later on with through mail and other communication, but there are exciting prizes for you to win. So get ready with all of that. Just go through the entire project. Try to think of what creative ways you can, build some more applications, add functionality on top of it. You don't have to implement all these things by yourself, right? So you don't have to add a lot of things to win exactly. I'll just look at if you applied the concepts really well, if you understand the concepts and what creativity you have put into your projects. That's all, right? So this is the idea. I hope I'm clear about the different details about this project. This is the project you're going to follow, and this is where you're going to submit the project. If you have any doubts about GitHub, please reach out to me. I'll be posting a Discord channel link. It is already there in the description here in the YouTube. So you can check out the YouTube link here. So in the description, you'll find there's a Discord channel link. So maybe somebody will post it on the chat as well. And then what you do is you just join the Discord channel there. We'll be discussing there throughout the weekend. I'll be available there. We will look at, say, whatever common doubts you have. We'll be addressing all those things. If you have some problems, creating a pull request or knowing about GitHub, we'll also be discussing all of that there. There are lounges there. There is a discussion rooms which you can follow the voice channels. And there are also different channels for different parts there. We can create new channels as we want later on. But for now, just join the Discord workshop there. And we'll be continuing our discussion later on after the stream ends over there. So that will be the only mode of communication between you and me, and we'll be continuing all of the discussion over there. That's all. So basically, this is the idea. Let me just go back to the stream and see if we have more questions. Yeah, you don't have to do it in Python. You can use any language of your choice. Will this be saved? Of course, this will be on my YouTube later on. Is this how they place ads, say, in Facebook? Exactly. So this is how we do it. So if you look at the Facebook architecture, it's somewhat similar. So we may have some kind of, so there's some ad agency, right? Say Google Ads or different kind of ad agency. It has some API. What the Facebook front end does is just make this call to that API, gets the information, displays it on your screen. That's all, right? So please share record videos workshop. Yeah, it will be on my YouTube. No issues there. Do we have to do in, thank you, thanks Jay. Do we have to do in Python? No, there's no language requirement. You can, this project itself is written in Python, but that is no requirement for you. You can choose any language you want. I won't be judging you based on what language you're using. It's just a way of, it's just a reference here, right? It does not have any code here. So don't worry about what code you want to write, what framework you want to use. It's entirely agnostic, language agnostic. You can choose whatever language you want. That's all. Okay, current affairs, yeah, because will be there. So do I have to do it in Python only? Okay, no, it's nothing. Okay. Where's Discord link? Okay, this for Discord link, I'll have to check my description here. Just give me a sec. I think, is it not here? Maybe I'll see. I think Shishti will be able to put the Discord link here. I'm not able to see the Discord link in this part. Yeah, just a sec. I'll be posting it here. Don't worry about it. It'll also be in the description after the stream ends. So I'll be, when you come back and you look at the description, also find Discord link there. But Discord link also will be here. Recorded session will be available on my YouTube channel here. So when you come back here, you can see the entire session. No issues there. All right. So yeah, I'll be posting Discord link really soon. Let me just see if I have the session. Let me just see. I'll open Discord here. This is the entire community page. I'll just post the link again. Okay, this is the. All right, so let me just run you through the entire place here. So this is the welcome and rules part. This is the project workshop discussion. This is the project discussion, and all of these are different, discussion rooms here. So I'll just see. I'll copy this link here. I'll send it to you. Yeah, there you go. I have this link box. Nothing to do. Yeah. So where to connect with you? If you have any questions, you can connect to me on LinkedIn or in Discord channel. So I'll be available on Discord through this entire weekend. We can maybe get on some voice channels, or we can answer questions on different channels as well. So that is not a problem. How much has happened that you can look at the entire stream again will be available later on. So you can see what different things there are. You can also try to reach out on LinkedIn or maybe Twitter. Twitter profile is WJS. I'm basically WJS everywhere. So you can search on any random network. It's mostly WJS everywhere. All right, so if I'll just wait for, let's say, 5-10 more minutes and see if there are more questions, and then we can close the stream for now. I just want you to just recap on whatever we have covered so far, right? So whatever we have done, whatever's happened, if you feel there's any part which I've missed, because I may have missed some part right now. So if you feel there's something which is missing, which you're not very clear on, let me know right now, so we can cover that. But I think we have pretty much covered the entire part here so far. Let's just wait for a few more minutes and see if there's more questions. Otherwise, we'll just close the stream. Okay, that is. Yep, I don't see any questions anymore. It is showing Python as prerequisite. You don't know Python. Yeah, as I told you, this is just a reference for you. You don't have to exactly code in Python. Right? So you don't have to write the entire text in Python. You can adapt this approach for any. It's just an idea for this project, right? So this is the idea that you have to implement, and you have multiple references here which you can link. You can see, you have to know about REST. You have to know about HTTP. So don't worry about this part here. So don't worry about the language at all. So you don't have to worry about if it's in Python or not. So these are different things which you learn and apply in any language of your choice. That's all. Don't worry about it. I won't be judging on your Python knowledge at all. That's not an issue. How to access Cricinfo API? That is something you'll have to search for yourself. It's really simple. I'll just search for, say, Cricinfo, right? I'll just go ahead and click on Cricinfo API. Hold on a sec. Sorry. Yeah, click on API. Okay. Cricinfo doesn't have an API, I think so. You have to look at some other things. Cric API, I think so. Cricket API. So it doesn't really matter if you have to use Cricinfo. You can choose any API of your choice. It doesn't have to even be cricket. You can even choose basketball or, say, football or any kind of choice. It doesn't have to be really hard and fast. It's just a template. You don't have to implement exactly the same thing. Okay, implement on any different game. So this is the Cric API. Right? This is something which you can also use, I guess. So I'm not sure what API you can use. So that is something which is open to implementation. You can choose whatever API you want. I think Crio API is now closed for some reason. Maybe yeah, this is the ESPN API. So you can use the ESPN API for finding out details about whatever sport you like. But this is something which is there. So I think they have closed the API for now. Yeah, so this is not really a big issue. You can choose any other API of your choice. Doesn't matter. After clicking on download project, I haven't got it through mail till now. Well, this is something which you can reach out to the Crio team for that. That won't be a problem. I am from non-CS background, want to go for full stack development. Can I got a job after developing? Yeah, of course. If you have some skills which are demonstrable, when you submit your project to this repository here, this will be available to view for public, right? So it will be a public repository. When you make contributions here, it will be available to see for different people, and it will count as your contribution. So that is something which you can use to maybe apply for jobs online. Why not? How many project tasks do we have to complete before Monday? Yeah, to be clear, you don't have to implement the entire thing. I just want you to implement this Telegram integration, Telegram or any other social media integration, basically. Right, so you have to implement until the third stage here. After that, this is something which you can do if you have time. You don't really have to do it. If you have time, if you want to learn more about what these different topics are, you can do it. But at least till the third point, it is something which is challenging and very useful thing to implement, right? For so far, we have only looked at concepts. We haven't looked at a very concrete implementation of APIs. So if you really do all of these steps, you'll be very confident in building any application you want. Basically, you will understand that all applications are built using APIs. So that is something which will gain confidence in, and they can build very complex applications using very simple code later on. That is the idea behind this entire workshop. See a lot of people building products and launching product hunt, feeling FOMO and marketing freelancers too late. Of course not. Of course not. It's never too late to start building. Is we need to modify project also need to build from yeah you don't have to modify. Again, this is just a reference for you. You don't have to build the same project. You don't have to build using the same language. You can just choose any kind of an idea for that sort. I just want you to understand APIs better, right? So I want you to fetch data from some API and then send this information to some kind of a social media channel. You can post it to Instagram, you can post it to Facebook or Telegram, WhatsApp, whatever choice you want. That is the idea. Where to submit the project? You have to submit the project on my GitHub repository here. This is something which I'll be putting it on the description later on, so don't worry about that. All the links will be there in description after that. So this is something, this is the URL which you have to go. WJash is my username. You can find simple web app there. It's a public repository. You can easily fork it and you can make pull request for that. Start contributing and make a pull request. That's how you submit the project. All right. Okay. So we'll be building. That's you need to modify where to submit projects. So should we join Crio? This is not something which I should answer. Okay, there it is. Yeah, you don't join Crio, join different. Let's say there are multiple programs like Crio Intro doing and multiple other developer focused programs. This is also one of the programs from Crio. So by participating in it, you are essentially joining Crio as well. It's not the same, anyways. All right. We have to submit this Monday. Yeah, for now, I'm thinking of Monday as a deadline. But don't worry about it. We'll discuss it on Discord. If you feel like we need some more time to implement stuff, we can change the deadline as well. That's not an issue. All that matters right now is for you to understand and implement this on your own. Don't stress out too much. Don't utilize the entire weekend. Chill out, take breaks. You have to complete by Monday. If the majority is not able to complete by Monday, we'll just stretch it to say Wednesday. There's not an issue at all. On next week, yeah, next week we can think of that later on. Like let's just see how much work you can do it, because it's not really a very hard application to build, but we'll just see what the majority goes with. Anyways, so I'm going to pay full stack dev course. You don't really have to pay for any courses as far as I'm concerned, because all of what I've learned so far is never from any paid course. So you'll find a lot of good tutorials online. You'll find articles. You can find different open source projects which you can implement on your own. So you can reach out later on to me. I'll just see what I can help with. But yeah, don't pay for courses online. It's not really worth it. All right. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes more. If I don't have any more questions in a couple of minutes, I'll just end the stream here. And I'll see you on Discord. I think that I've posted the Discord link already. I'll just pin it somewhere. Let me just pin this comment here. Yeah, I've replaced the pin comment with the Discord link. So yeah, if you're free, you can just join this link here. That's all. Yeah, this is pinned already. Got it. How to extract data implement from Cricinfo. Again, this is something which is very simple. We are using the APIs. If you use the APIs part, you get the information as JSON format. You convert the JSON to whatever language you're building, objects, and you can store it wherever you want. How working it some create problems 7 not access. This is something which I don't understand, Kiran. What are the basic languages need for looking at? Yeah, Node.js is sufficient. Like JavaScript is sufficient for building whatever you want. But this is not a question of what language you want to use. So if you're comfortable with only one language, build it using that language. All right. So what matters is you understand the concept. After that, you can implement it in any language you want. So it's basically a question of using syntaxes. Even I don't remember any syntaxes from Python or JavaScript. If I'm stuck at some point, just do a Google search. I find out how to make a request online. I just copy that code and just adapt that code to whatever business need I have. Right. So don't worry about any syntaxes or languages. That's a very minor issue. All you need to know is the concept that you're going to apply. That's all. That is the most important thing. All right. This is nice answering questions. Okay. Do I will live chat? Still the same thing? Yeah. All right. Let's just see how many folks we have on Discord right now. Maybe we have a few people. Let's say we have 20 of you, maybe more on Discord. They're coming in. That's awesome. Workshop discussion. Hello, session. Thank you so much, folks. Yeah, I'll add a few more. You can just ask for any channels if you want. You can add some more discussion channels here, project specific channels, API channels, or whatever different things you want. That's not an issue at all. Don't worry about that. Yeah, I think we don't have any more questions so far, so maybe we can, wrap this up. Really, thank you so much, guys, for the patience. We had a 1 hour delay at the start, and it caused a lot of problem for a lot of people. So I'm really sorry about that, but I hope you are able to learn a lot of things here. And we'll continue to learn over the weekend. It's going to be a very fun weekend of building stuff. And I hope you get more confident in building really complex applications all by yourself. Okay, so that is all. Shishti, can we end the stream now? I'm not able to understand the concept of calling API. Okay, so I'll just answer this question as a final question. So calling API is, say, you essentially have to make HTTP calls, right? So basically what the idea is this: you have an endpoint. As I showed you, you have some URL, you have some slash endpoint. Now API is basically, API again is an abstract concept. You don't have an entity called API. You don't have a file API, or you don't have things like that. You just have a description page, like we saw for the AccuWeather or some other thing. You have a description page which just defines what are the functions and what are the different endpoints you can access those functions at. So if you want to access that function, you have to make an HTTP call. That is the call which you have to make. You have to make an HTTP call with get request, say get or post or whatever command you want, depending on what is the use case you want. So I'll use a get request, I'll specify the URL, and I'll get the response back as JSON. That is what API calling basically means. It is an HTTP call to an API, is what an API call is. That's all. How to extract critical events? Again, like any kind of extraction, any kind of way in which you want to source data is done entirely through APIs. So if you want to have the event data, there needs to be an event API which sends you all the information there. So basically all of that is covered. How to use customized error page? Now that is something which is specific to the language you're using, right? If you're using, say, Express, or if you're using some kind of front end application, so you'll have all kinds of ways in customizing your own applications there. So if you want to build a customized error page, look at whatever front end you're using and look at whatever libraries you have access to, and whether you can, build a kind of, say, a customized web page using that. That is part of the front end mostly. You don't have to worry about that. It's very, very language specific question there. Don't worry about that. All right. Yeah, keep the questions coming in. Maybe also have. Yeah, I think we can end the stream now. Yeah, this enough. Yeah, I've put the link on the comment section there, so you can just join the Discord there. No issues. All right, so I'll just end the stream for now, and we'll connect later on Discord. The link will be available on my YouTube channel. That's all. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great night. Bye bye.